The galaxy always believed humanity was fragile, a species destined to bow before greater civilizations. To the vast Galactic Council, Earth was a curious anomaly, brave enough to speak in the halls of power, but still seen as young, reckless, and unworthy of true respect. For years, humans were tolerated, mocked, and underestimated. But the Council made one mistake they could never take back. They struck at what humanity valued most, a child. And in that single moment, they awoke something the galaxy had forgotten. The story begins not with warships or blazing weapons, but with silence. A child, innocent and unarmed, was taken during a diplomatic summit, caught in the storm of arrogance that rippled through the Council's chambers. No soldier's armor, no counselor's decree, and no alien power could justify what happened next. That child became the symbol of everything the galaxy never understood about Earth. Humanity does not abandon its own. And when one child was lost, billions across Earth heard the echo as if it had been their own son or daughter. At first, the galaxy expected the usual response: outrage, protests, and angry words hurled into the void. That was how most species acted. But humanity is not most species. The Council had forgotten that Earth's history is not written in soft negotiations or carefully chosen words. It is written in fire, sacrifice, and the relentless will to survive. For thousands of years, humanity had endured wars, plagues, invasions, and its own storms of chaos. And buried beneath that long history was something no alien ever truly believed existed: the ancient fleet. Legends whispered among humanity spoke of colossal ships sealed away in the deep vaults of Earth, relics of a forgotten era when humanity first reached for the stars. The Council dismissed those tales as human exaggeration, nothing more than the myths of a world desperate to appear strong. Yet the truth was far more dangerous. The fleet was real. The ships slept beneath oceans, mountains, and deserts, silent, waiting for the moment when Earth would call them back to the surface. And with the death of that child, the call finally came. It began with tremors. Across Earth's cities, people felt the ground shake as the oceans split and waves rose higher than skyscrapers. From beneath the dark waters came black hulls, scarred but unbroken, older than most civilizations in the Council's memory. From mountains long thought dormant, vast chambers opened to reveal carriers and cruisers lined in rows like giants in slumber. And from the deserts, where the sand had hidden secrets for centuries, ships of steel and fury rose into the sky. Humanity's forgotten fleet was no longer a legend. It was a storm rising. The galaxy had seen human warships before, modern designs built in dockyards and assembled with alien assistance. They were powerful, but still comparable to what other species fielded. What emerged now was different. These vessels were built in another age, designed not for diplomacy or defense, but for survival at any cost. Their weapons pulsed with energy unknown to the Council, their armor forged from materials that laughed at conventional fire. They were not just ships, they were humanity's memory, its inheritance, awakened by rage. While the Council debated in their marble halls, arguing over excuses and shifting blame, Earth was already moving. The world that had been underestimated for so long became unified overnight. Petty disputes vanished. Borders blurred. Every hand, every mind, every resource was bent toward one goal: justice. The fleet was not controlled by politicians or generals, but by the collective will of a species that had lost one of its own. Billions spoke with one voice, and the ancient ships answered. The Council's intelligence networks scrambled to understand what was happening. Some dismissed the rising fleet as theatrics, a bluff to intimidate them. Others whispered in secret chambers that humanity had been planning this for centuries. Yet no explanation could undo the truth. For the first time in living memory, the galaxy felt fear, not of a rival empire, not of some wandering conqueror, but of humanity. Because humans were not threatening war. they were promising it. And everyone knew they would not stop until the council paid for what had been done. But even as the fleet rose and humanity rallied, questions burned in the shadows. Who had ordered the attack on the child? Was it truly the council as a whole, or a faction hidden within its layers of politics? Did they act out of fear, arrogance, or something far darker? The answer remained buried, and the uncertainty only fueled humanity's fury. Because when the truth was hidden, when blame was avoided, the wound only deepened. To humans, it no longer mattered which hand had struck the blow. The entire council stood guilty. In the orbit of Earth, as the black ships of the ancient fleet aligned into formation, their hulls reflecting the burning glow of the sun, the galaxy's balance shifted. Transmission after transmission was sent from Earth, short and simple. We are coming. There were no negotiations, no soft words, no room for apologies. Humanity had been pushed past the point of forgiveness, and every council world knew it. Still there were whispers, rumors that the fleet's awakening was more than just revenge. Some claimed the ships were not merely machines of war, but guardians created by ancestors who had faced threats beyond the council's understanding. If that were true, then humanity's rage had not only called forth weapons of destruction, but also something far older, something meant to challenge the universe itself. In the end, the death of one child did what centuries of politics never could. It united Earth. It tore away the veil of underestimation. It forced the galaxy to face a truth it had long ignored. Humanity may be young, it may be reckless, it may even be fragile in the eyes of the stars, but when pushed, when hurt, when one of its children is taken, humanity becomes unstoppable. And as the first ships of the fleet left orbit, their engines roaring like thunder across the void, the galaxy held its breath. Because everyone knew what came next. Humanity was not marching to war for conquest or territory. Humanity was marching for justice. And in the silence between the stars, even the most powerful empires whispered the same question. What happens when the council that rules the galaxy faces the fury of Earth? The answer was coming, and it would arrive not in whispers, but in fire. The fleet did not surge forward all at once. It moved with patience, like a predator testing the air before striking. Around Earth, the sky was no longer filled with stars alone, but with shadows of titans, ancient ships whose designs had been forgotten by every galactic archive. Some vessels stretched so wide they blocked the sun as they passed, casting entire cities in momentary darkness. People stood on rooftops and streets, watching in silence, hearts caught between awe and fury. They were not only witnessing the rise of ships, but the rise of humanity itself. Yet for all the noise of engines and the thunder of waves crashing against newly risen hulls, Earth itself felt strangely quiet. Governments tried to keep order, but there was no real need. The people had already chosen their path. Even those who had long opposed war felt the weight of what had happened. The death of a child was not politics, it was personal. Every human understood that grief. Every human carried it. That unity was something the Galactic Council could never imagine, and perhaps that was why they had misjudged humanity so badly. Still, questions stirred beneath the surface. Who had built these ships? How long had they been hidden, waiting in the dark? Few alive could answer. Some said they were remnants of an age when humans had first reached for the stars, long before their modern governments. Others claimed they were the work of an older Earth civilization, one that had vanished from history but left behind warnings and weapons. The truth remained buried, but it hardly mattered. What mattered was that the fleet was awake, and it belonged to humanity. In the halls of the Galactic Council, the news spread like wildfire. Counselors, used to endless debates and carefully measured threats, now found themselves facing a storm they could not dismiss. Some urged diplomacy, desperate to send envoys to Earth with apologies and reparations. Others hardened their stance, claiming that humanity's reaction was proof of its instability. But beneath their speeches lay fear. Every council species had seen wars, rebellions, and uprisings, but never had an entire world risen in such unity, driven not by conquest, but by loss. For the human representatives still stationed within the council's grand chamber, the silence was heavier than words. They stood accused, not with formal charges, but with the lingering stares of alien diplomats who now realized the cost of their collective arrogance. No human lifted a weapon there, but their presence alone spoke volumes. They did not need to shout. The galaxy itself was already listening. Back on Earth, the preparations deepened. Families whispered farewells to loved ones who volunteered to serve on the awakened ships. Engineers rushed to understand systems far older than any training manual could explain. Pilots stepped into command chairs where controls responded not to codes but to instinct, as though the ships themselves remembered what it meant to be guided by human hands. The connection between the vessels and their crews was unsettling, almost alive, and yet no one dared to question it. They needed these ships, and the ships seemed to need them. But there was another layer to the mystery. Among the ruins unearthed with the fleet, symbols and carvings were found, etched deep into the metal. They were not written in any known language, but the patterns carried a strange familiarity, as though echoing the structure of human thought. Some believed the ships had not just been built by ancestors, but bound to humanity itself, designed to awaken only when Earth's survival demanded it. If that was true, then the child's death had not only sparked rage, it had fulfilled a condition written long before modern history. The galaxy watched with increasing unease as the first fleet detachments left Earth's orbit. They did not strike immediately. Instead, they lingered at the edge of human territory, moving deliberately, as if choosing their path carefully. This hesitation unsettled the council most of all. If the humans had attacked in blind rage, they might have been predictable. But their patience meant calculation, and calculation meant danger. Meanwhile, whispers spread through the underworld of the galaxy. Traders, smugglers, and spies spoke of strange movements along the borders, of human agents seen negotiating in secret, of alliances forming in the shadows. Some species long oppressed by the Council looked at Earth and saw not danger, but hope. If humanity could stand against the Council, perhaps others could too. In backroom meetings and quiet transmissions, the seeds of rebellion began to stir. Still, the question that haunted the galaxy remained unanswered. Who within the Council had given the order that began all this? Many counselors denied involvement, claiming the child's death had been the act of radicals or an accident covered up by rival factions. But the more they denied, the less humanity believed. To humans, the Council was a single entity, guilty as one, and so long as that mystery remained unsolved, there could be no forgiveness. Among the ancient ships, one stood out from the rest. It was larger, older, and darker, its surface etched with scars from wars forgotten by time. Unlike the others, it did not rise easily. When it finally broke free from its mountain tomb, the skies thundered, and entire cities shook as though the earth itself resisted releasing it. Yet when it hovered in the atmosphere, its presence silenced everything. Those who saw it whispered that this was not just a warship. It was the heart of the fleet, the first and the last, and it had waited longer than any could imagine. No one knew who would command it. Leaders debated, generals argued, but in the end, the ship chose. The doors opened not for politicians, but for ordinary men and women drawn by something they could not explain. When they stepped inside, the ship's systems flared to life, recognizing them as if it had always known they would come. And in that moment, humanity understood. The fleet was not merely a weapon. It was a bond, a legacy carried forward by those who would fight not for power, but for survival. As the fleet gathered strength, the Council scrambled. Fleets of their own began to mobilize, their ships forming walls of defense around core worlds. Broadcasts filled the stars with promises of investigation, committees, and inquiries, all meant to calm humanity's anger. But none of it mattered. The words were empty. The Council had crossed a line that could never be erased. Tension grew heavier with every passing day. Humanity no longer asked if war was coming. They asked only when. Children looked up at the sky and saw not constellations, but the silhouettes of ships ready to protect them. Elders who had once preached caution now spoke of honor, of duty, of standing together no matter the cost. Every heart beat with the same rhythm. Humanity would not remain silent. But the greatest mystery was still hidden. Deep within the Council's records, files were sealed away, forbidden even to most members. Rumors claimed those files contained the truth of what had happened at the summit. The reason a child had been taken, the hand that had guided the strike. If humanity ever uncovered that truth, the galaxy feared what they would unleash. The ancient fleet did not move forward blindly. Instead, it hovered like a clenched fist at the edge of human space, a storm contained but ready to break. From orbiting stations and newly armed colonies, humanity watched the Council's broadcasts with narrowed eyes. Apologies were spoken, condolences offered, but none of it touched the wound that had been carved into Earth's heart. No words could erase the image of a child taken, no speeches could silence the roar of the fleet that now waited for the command to strike. Meanwhile, deep within Council territory, some species began to question their loyalty. For generations, they had bowed to the Council's authority, paying tribute and following rules that served only the powerful. Now they saw Earth defying that authority and gathering strength. Whispers of rebellion spread in their marketplaces and meeting halls. If humanity could strike at the Council, maybe they too could rise. But rebellion was not simple. Surveillance was everywhere, and the Council had its own ways of silencing dissent before it grew too loud. Still, the seed had been planted, and the fleet's presence made it grow stronger. Inside the chambers of Earth's leadership, debates raged. Some argued that they should strike immediately, using the shock of the fleet's awakening to shatter the Council before it could prepare. Others urged caution, warning that the galaxy was vast and that once war began, there would be no end until one side was broken completely. But what no one admitted aloud was that the fleet itself seemed restless. Systems pulsed with power even when not commanded. Weapons hummed faintly, as if anticipating use. It was almost as though the ships themselves hungered for war. Among the crews, strange stories began to circulate. Pilots spoke of hearing whispers through the consoles, voices that guided them during maneuvers. Engineers found systems repairing themselves, responding to problems before they could even be identified. Some even claimed to see brief flashes of figures in the corridors, shadows of those who had once walked the ships long ago. Whether these were illusions, echoes, or something more, no one knew. But it left many uneasy. The fleet was powerful, but it was also unknown, and humanity had little time to uncover its secrets. As the standoff stretched on, smaller conflicts began to emerge. Skirmishes flared on the edges of contested space. Human patrols clashed with Council scouts, neither side willing to fully back down. Every encounter added fuel to the fire, with each loss or victory broadcast across the stars. The Council tried to frame humanity as reckless aggressors, but the images of the child's fate still lingered in the public memory. No matter how the Council spun the story, too many saw the truth. This had begun with arrogance, and humanity was only answering it. Back on Earth, families of the fleet members gathered in silent vigils. Communities that had once argued over politics now shared meals and prayers, bound together by the knowledge that their loved ones might never return. Children drew pictures of the ships, decorating classroom walls with sketches of dark hulls and blazing engines. Teachers told stories of Earth's long history of resilience, reminding the young that their people had survived worse odds before. The sense of identity, of being human, grew stronger every day. The Council, desperate to regain control, sent envoys in secret. They reached out to individuals on Earth, offering wealth, power, or influence in exchange for sabotage. A few were tempted, but most turned away in anger. When some of these offers were exposed, the fury of the people only grew. Humanity realized the Council was not seeking peace, it was seeking to divide them, and that was the one strategy guaranteed to fail. Still, the mystery of the child's death haunted everything. Investigators on Earth pieced together fragments of information, digging through intercepted transmissions and whispers from sympathetic species. What they found hinted at something larger, something carefully hidden. The attack had not been random. It had been planned, carried out with precision, and then buried under layers of bureaucracy. Whoever was behind it had wanted a spark, a reaction. But why? What could be gained by provoking Earth into awakening its fleet? Some feared the answer. What if the Council itself was not the true enemy? What if there were forces within or beyond it that had orchestrated the event for their own ends? If that were true, then humanity was walking into a trap, its fury being guided like a blade into someone else's design. But by now, there was no turning back. The fleet had risen, and the galaxy was watching. As the days turned into weeks, tension became almost unbearable. The black ships of the fleet hovered in formation, engines glowing faintly against the stars. Across the galaxy, Council fleets mirrored them, weapons armed but silent. It was a balance that could not last, a knife's edge that grew thinner with every heartbeat. Both sides waited for the first spark, knowing that once it came, nothing would stop the fire. And somewhere in the darkness, hidden hands moved pieces across the board, waiting for humanity to make its choice. The child's death had been the beginning. What came next would decide not just the fate of Earth, but the fate of the galaxy itself. The silence before the storm had stretched so long that it began to feel like part of life itself. Every broadcast, every whispered report, every distant flicker of movement in the stars only deepened the tension. Humanity's fleet remained like a shadow cast across the galaxy, a living reminder that something vast and unstoppable had been awakened. On Council worlds, children looked at the night sky with unease, asking their parents if the humans would come for them. On Earth, people lived with the certainty that war was no longer a question, but an inevitability. The Council tried everything to hold its fragile order together. Fleets were stationed along border systems, supply chains redirected, propaganda pushed through every channel. Speeches filled with promises of justice rang through their cities, but no one truly believed them anymore. Even within the Council, cracks widened. Some factions argued that the child's death must have been the work of extremists, demanding open trials to prove their innocence. Others silenced any such talk, fearing that too much truth would destroy what little unity remained. In the shadows of those chambers, rivalries sharpened into daggers and whispers turned into accusations. For humanity, the waiting was unbearable. Families counted the days as their loved ones trained aboard the awakened ships, learning to work with vessels that often seemed to know more than they did. Some ships had already begun forming bonds with their crews, responding to their thoughts as much as their hands. To many, this felt like trust. To others, it was unsettling, a reminder that the fleet was not fully understood. But unease could not outweigh purpose. Humanity had been wronged, and justice demanded action. Skirmishes grew bolder. Council patrols tested the edges of human space, and in every encounter, the black ships of Earth pushed them back. Reports of destroyed outposts and missing scouts spread across the stars. Each side accused the other of aggression, but both knew the truth. The galaxy was standing on the edge of something far larger. The first true battle had not yet come, but when it did, it would not be a skirmish. It would be a storm. Behind closed doors on Earth, leaders debated what to do. Some argued for striking the Council's core worlds directly, ending the threat before it could grow stronger. Others pushed for precision, targeting only those responsible for the child's death. But the truth was, no one knew who was responsible. Information uncovered by human intelligence painted a picture of a council in disarray. Some files hinted at rogue factions with hidden motives. Others suggested that the event had been deliberately covered up. But every path led into fog, into secrets that seemed to multiply the deeper they dug. Humanity wanted revenge. But against whom? The ancient fleet itself seemed restless, as though it sensed the growing tension. Systems pulsed with energy that sometimes overloaded sensors. Weapons glowed faintly, alive even in silence. Engineers described it as breathing, as though the ships were not machines at all, but living things waiting to be unleashed. Strange phenomena continued, voices echoing faintly in the corridors, symbols glowing along the hulls, shadows seen in the corners of vision. Some believed these were the ghosts of those who had once commanded the ships. Others feared it was something older, something bound into the vessels themselves. Either way, the message was clear. The fleet was waiting, and it would not wait forever. Among the council, fear hardened into desperation. Fleets were gathered in great numbers, entire sectors emptied of defense just to reinforce the core. Billions of soldiers were drafted, trained in haste, and armed with weapons that, for the first time in centuries, were designed with a single species in mind. The council prepared not for negotiation, but for survival. For all their speeches of unity and order, they had come to believe what many already knew. If the humans came, they would not come halfway. Yet as the preparations built, so too did the questions. In the dark markets of the galaxy, smugglers whispered of transmissions traced to unknown origins. In the back halls of council power, voices hushed when talk turned to hidden orders and sealed archives. It became harder to deny that someone somewhere had orchestrated the child's death deliberately. If so, then perhaps humanity and the council were both being played. But by whom? The answer was buried in silence, and silence had already cost too much. On Earth, ordinary people prepared in their own way. Families carved symbols into the walls of their homes, prayers for strength. Farmers donated food to feed the crews of the fleet. Teachers told their students stories of humanity's past victories, battles where impossible odds had been broken by courage and unity. There was fear, yes, but it was not the paralyzing fear of weakness. It was the kind of fear that sharpened resolve, that burned in the heart until it became something unbreakable. Then came the moment that shattered the waiting. A council fleet, larger than any patrol before it, crossed into human space. They claimed it was a mistake, a navigational error, but the truth was clear. The ships did not withdraw. They lingered, armed and ready, and in response the black ships of the ancient fleet stirred from their silence, engines igniting like a second sunrise across the void. For days, the two forces faced one another in the cold of space. Thousands of ships held their positions, weapons armed, every sensor straining for the slightest sign of movement. Tension hummed through every corridor, every station, every world. Soldiers strapped themselves into chairs. Civilians watched the skies, and across both Earth and Council worlds, people held their breath. Yet still the first shot did not come. Perhaps both sides feared the scale of what would follow. Perhaps they were waiting for something else. Humanity began to suspect that this was no simple standoff, that the true enemy was still in the shadows, waiting for both sides to bleed before revealing itself. And then, without warning, the transmissions began. Across human channels and council networks alike, signals burst through the silence. They were not words but images, symbols carved into the hulls of the ancient fleet, the same ones humanity had uncovered in the ruins. The council recognized them too. They were older than recorded history, older than the council itself. Whatever message they carried, it connected both humanity and the galaxy to something neither side fully understood. The fleets did not fire, but the silence that followed was more dangerous than any weapon. The symbols burned across the screens of ships and stations, their meaning unknown, their presence undeniable. And in that moment, every soldier, every captain, every civilian knew the same truth. This was not only a war between Earth and the Council. Something greater was stirring, and the galaxy itself was caught in its wake. The standoff teetered on the edge of collapse. Council ships shifted uneasily in formation. Human vessels pulsed with restrained fury. The smallest spark could ignite a firestorm that would consume them all. And yet, beneath the fear, beneath the rage, a darker question began to rise. What if this was never about the Council at all? What if the child's death, the fleet's awakening, and the chaos now unraveling across the stars were pieces of a plan written long before humanity or the Council knew the truth? The answer was not yet clear. But the galaxy stood at the edge, trembling as the storm gathered its strength. The climax was coming, and when it broke, nothing would remain the same. The transmissions of ancient symbols spread faster than any fleet could travel. One moment they were flickering on the bridges of human warships and Council cruisers. The next they were streaming across civilian networks, pirate frequencies, and even worlds that had no business being part of the conflict. The galaxy had always been vast and divided, yet for the first time in living memory, every species saw the same images. They were etched into the steel of the human fleet and recognized with horror by the Council. Historians rushed to interpret them. Linguists dug through fragments of long-forgotten archives. But no one could deny their weight. These were not human designs. They predated the Council itself. And worse, they were warnings. Among the broken shards of translation came words repeated across every attempt. Guardians, prison, awakening. What had once seemed like a weapon forged by ancient humans now carried the shadow of something larger. If the fleet had been built to guard against an enemy, what kind of enemy could require weapons of this scale? For humanity, the revelation only deepened their resolve. Whether the ships were guardians or relics, they belonged to Earth now. They had risen in humanity's darkest hour, and that was proof enough that they were bound to human survival. But for the Council, the meaning was clear and terrifying. If humanity had control of something designed to face an ancient enemy, then perhaps they themselves were no longer the greatest power in the galaxy. Perhaps they were nothing more than bystanders in a struggle they could not control. As the two fleets faced each other in the dead of space, the symbols appeared again, this time in motion. They shifted, rearranged, forming new patterns like a puzzle slowly assembling itself. The human crews described hearing faint vibrations through their ships, as though the vessels themselves were humming with anticipation. Council crews reported the same, and for the first time in history, both sides were united in fear of the same unknown. The black ships of Earth's fleet seemed to tremble as the signals grew stronger, their systems resonating with the rhythm as though recognizing an old enemy. Council fleets, too, fell silent as their sensors confirmed the truth. Something vast was moving out there, something that had been sealed away for millennia, and so the stage was set. Humanity and the Council stood armed and ready, hatred and mistrust still burning, while in the distance, the true enemy began to awaken. The choice was no longer simple vengeance, it was survival. But the question remained. Would humanity and the Council destroy each other before the ancient enemy even arrived? Or would they be forced, despite everything, to face it together? The answer waited in the darkness, drawing closer with every passing second. And when it came, the galaxy would never be the same. The pulses from the edge of the galaxy grew stronger, echoing across every listening post and sensor array. What had begun as faint static had become a steady rhythm, a pattern too precise to be natural. It wasn't just a signal anymore, it was a heartbeat, and it was getting closer. On every human warship, lights flickered as systems synced with the strange resonance. On every Council vessel, alarms shrieked as engineers tried and failed to block out the interference. Something was reaching across the void, and both sides felt the weight of its approach. Yet instead of uniting them, the signals only deepened the rift. Humanity saw it as proof of what the Watchers had warned. An enemy long forgotten was stirring, and they had been chosen, perhaps destined, to confront it. The Council, however, saw something different. To them, the Black Fleet wasn't simply reacting, it was answering. And if it was answering, then perhaps humanity had been chosen for something darker. Fear spread through Council worlds like wildfire. The whispers grew louder. Maybe Earth wasn't a savior. Maybe it was the key to unleashing what should never have been awakened. This was when the second twist began to unravel. Deep within the symbols, among the shifting shapes and patterns, new fragments appeared. Unlike the earlier warnings, these were clearer, sharper, almost deliberate. They weren't just coordinates, they were messages. And they weren't coming from the ancient fleet itself, they were coming from the prison. When translated, the fragments carried a chilling message. Do not resist. Do not oppose. The war was never meant for you. The Watchers had warned of a returning enemy, but these messages suggested something far worse, that the enemy was already aware of humanity and the Council, and it did not see them as threats, it saw them as irrelevant. This revelation shattered the fragile hope that either side held. If the enemy didn't see them as dangerous, then what were they? Pawns? Prey? Or perhaps tools to be bent to its will? Humanity's leaders debated furiously, some arguing that the message was a lie meant to divide them, while others feared it was the truth. The Council fractured even faster, with whole delegations storming out of sessions, declaring they would not waste lives fighting alongside a species that might already be compromised. Meanwhile, within the human fleet, something even stranger was happening. Crews reported strange dreams, vivid and shared across ships. People who had never met described the same visions. Endless halls of broken stone, skies filled with burning symbols, and shadows moving just beyond sight. Some woke screaming. Others woke whispering words in languages they had never learned. It wasn't confined to humanity either. Council captains admitted, reluctantly, that their crews were suffering the same dreams. Whatever was awakening at the edge of the galaxy was not only reaching their machines, it was reaching into their minds. For the Council, this was unbearable proof that humanity had doomed them all. The Black Fleet was a conduit, a beacon drawing the enemy closer and spreading its influence. For humanity, the dreams carried a different meaning. Some believed they were warnings, attempts by the Watchers, or perhaps even the enemy itself, to prepare them. Others saw them as a test, a chance to prove they had the strength to endure what older civilizations could not. But then came the escalation no one could have predicted. The signals stopped. For days, silence reigned. No heartbeat, no patterns, no dreams. The galaxy held its breath. Humanity prepared for the worst, bracing for the moment the silence would break. The Council, still divided, tried to seize the pause to push humanity into surrender. But before anything could be decided, the silence was broken. Not by a return of the signals, but by something else entirely. A ship appeared. Not human, not Council, not even like the vessels of the Black Fleet. It emerged from the coordinates like a scar torn across the stars, its shape shifting and impossible to define. Every scanner failed to capture it, every sensor glitched when it drew near. And yet, unmistakably, it was real. At first there was panic. Weapons were armed, fleets scrambled, worlds prepared for evacuation. But the ship did not attack. Instead, it transmitted a single message across every channel, in every language. The war is not yours, but your defiance has been noted. The meaning was unclear, but the consequences were immediate. Humanity took it as a challenge, proof that they had caught the attention of something that believed itself untouchable. The Council, however, saw it as a death sentence. If the ancient enemy had marked them, then resisting was suicide. And so the divide deepened once again. Humanity prepared for war, believing they had no choice but to stand and fight. The council began seeking ways to retreat, to cut their ties and save what little they could of their civilizations. But the twist did not end with the ship's arrival. A secret came to light, one buried by the council for generations. Long before Earth had risen to power, long before the Council had united, they had discovered fragments of the same symbols now appearing on the Black Fleet. They had known even then that something waited beyond the stars. And in their fear, they had chosen silence. They had hidden the truth from humanity, believing Earth too reckless, too emotional to be trusted with it. The child's death had not been the first mistake. It had only been the last in a long chain of arrogance and lies. When this truth reached Earth, it ignited fury unlike anything before. Humanity's leaders declared that the Council had not only caused the present crisis, but had betrayed the entire galaxy. The Black Fleet roared in response, its weapons humming with energy as though feeding off humanity's rage. Council leaders, desperate and cornered, tried to explain themselves, but their words fell on deaf ears. The time for diplomacy was over, and just as war seemed inevitable, the second twist revealed its sharpest edge. The Watchers, the half-lost beings found within the stasis pods, awoke fully. Their minds, though fractured, carried a revelation that froze every argument in place. The enemy was not simply awakening, it had already infiltrated. The dreams were not visions of warning. They were breaches. The enemy was inside them, learning, testing, reaching into their hearts and minds. The war wasn't coming. It had already begun. The fleets bristled with weapons, humanity poised for vengeance. The Council split between fear and survival. But beneath it all, the greater truth pulsed like a buried fuse. The enemy was not at the edge of the galaxy. It was here, whispering in their dreams, pushing them toward the very war that would weaken them before it struck. And so, the stakes rose higher than ever. Humanity and the Council, blinded by anger and mistrust, stood ready to destroy each other, while in the shadows, the true enemy smiled, waiting for the moment they were both too broken to resist. The heartbeat returned, louder than before, shaking ships and stations across the galaxy, and this time, it was not a signal. It was a countdown. The countdown reverberated like thunder in the bones of every ship and station, a drumbeat that could not be silenced. Humanity's fleet and the Council's armadas stared one another down, weapons primed, fear and fury bleeding into every decision. The black ships thrummed with power, their hulls alive with ancient symbols that glowed brighter with every pulse. The Council's formations wavered, as though even their war-hardened admirals felt the weight of something far greater pressing down on them. No one knew what would happen when the countdown ended, but everyone understood one truth. Time was running out. On Earth, billions watched the skies, following the reports with clenched fists and silent prayers. They did not see themselves as prey nor as pawns. They were human, and humans did not yield. Across Council worlds, fear became panic. Riots broke out in cities, citizens demanding to know why their leaders had hidden the truth for so long. Every moment the countdown grew louder, order fractured further. The galaxy was no longer divided along the line of human and alien, but between those who would fight and those who would flee. Then, as the final pulses neared, the Watchers stirred. Their voices echoed not from their throats, but through every channel, every screen, every mind. They revealed what the Council had feared most but never admitted. The enemy had no form of its own. It was not a single fleet or empire. It was a presence, a will that spread like infection, taking root in the minds of civilizations until they destroyed themselves. That was why the Watchers had built the Black Fleet. It was not only a weapon, it was a shield, a vessel capable of resisting the infection, but it could not act alone. It needed those who burned brightest, those whose will could not be bent. And now, it had chosen humanity. The council reeled in disbelief. To them, this was proof that humans were not allies, but carriers of a force that could not be controlled. To humanity, it was confirmation of what they had suspected all along. They were meant to stand against something no one else could. The arguments ended as the countdown struck its final beat. Space itself seemed to fracture, and from the void came the enemy's true form. It was not a fleet, but a storm, a vast cloud of living darkness stretching across light years, threaded with lightning that tore open space. Within its depths, shapes flickered, half-formed, shifting, familiar yet wrong. Voices whispered from its core, not with words, but with memories stolen from the minds of every being who had dreamed. It did not fire weapons. It simply pressed forward, swallowing stars in silence. Panic swept the council lines. Some ships broke formation, fleeing into the void. Others fired blindly, their weapons vanishing into the dark as though the storm absorbed them. Humanity's fleet, however, held steady. The black ships moved as one, answering the will of their crews with impossible precision. Energy rippled through their hulls, and beams of light carved into the storm, tearing apart pieces that dissolved into ash. For the first time, the enemy recoiled. But the victory was short-lived. Every piece destroyed gave rise to new whispers, stronger than before. Human captains clutched their heads, hearing voices promising them peace, power, or forgiveness. Council crews turned their weapons on one another, their minds broken by the invasion. The infection was spreading faster now, feeding on fear. The war was no longer just of fleets, but of wills. And then the unexpected happened. A council fleet that had fled minutes earlier returned, not under orders, not in formation, but in chaos. Their ships glowed with the same symbols as the human fleet. Somehow, through desperation or sheer refusal to surrender, they had linked with the resonance too. It was the first crack in the wall of mistrust, the proof that the infection could be resisted by more than just humanity. Hope surged, thin and fragile, but real. The battle became a storm within a storm. Human and council ships fought side by side, their weapons carving light across the void, their wills pushing back against the tide of whispers. The watchers guided them, their fragmented voices weaving through the noise, teaching them to hold their minds firm, to resist the infection by leaning on one another's strength. For a moment, it seemed they might stand a chance. But the enemy was not finished. The storm shifted, its whispers coalescing into a single voice that echoed across every mind. It was not threatening. It was not cruel. It was patient, almost gentle. You cannot destroy what is within you. And with those words, it revealed the final truth. The infection had already begun, not just with dreams, but with actions. The child's death, the spark of everything, had not been the council's will. It had been the enemy's hand, reaching through its whispers, pushing them into conflict. Both sides had been pawns all along. The revelation hit like a blade to the heart. Humanity's rage, the council's fear, the awakening of the fleet, none of it had been chance. It was all part of the infection's design, feeding off their hatred to make them weaker. For a breathless moment, despair threatened to crush even the strongest wills. And then, quietly but firmly, humanity answered. If the enemy fed on hate, then it would starve on unity. The call spread across the fleets, from captain to soldier, from ship to ship. Hold the line together. Council crews, once ready to abandon humanity, now rallied beside them. Humans, once burning with vengeance, tempered their fury into resolve. The Black Fleet roared with light, symbols blazing brighter than ever before, no longer a relic of the past, but a beacon for the future. The climax struck in a single unified surge. Every ship poured its energy not into destruction, but into resistance, into sealing their minds against the infection and standing as one. The storm writhed, its whispers turning to screams as it found no foothold. The light of the fleets cut deeper, tearing open its core until, at last, the darkness shattered, scattering into fragments that faded into the void. The galaxy was silent again. The storm was gone. Humanity and the Council had stood together, not as enemies, but as survivors of something far greater. It was victory, but it was not complete. For in the final moment, as the enemy dissolved, its voice whispered one last time, softer than before, almost amused. "You have won nothing. You carry me with you always." And then it was gone. The fleets drifted in silence, scarred but alive. Humanity looked to its ancient ships, glowing faintly with symbols that had guided them through the storm. The Council, humbled and shaken, could no longer deny the truth. They had been wrong to doubt, wrong to hide, wrong to divide. For now, there was peace. But the final twist lingered like a shadow. If the enemy had planted itself within them long ago, if every thought and fear could be bent toward its will, then the real war was not in the stars. It was within. The victory was real, but it was not the end. It was only the beginning of a far greater battle, one that no fleet, no weapon, and no fleet of ancient ships could fight for them. Humanity had unleashed its fury, the Council had learned humility, and together they had beaten back the storm. But the question remained. When the whispers returned, would they stand united, or would the infection find a way to divide them once again? And somewhere, beyond the stars, the heartbeat began anew. The silence after the storm felt heavier than the battle itself. Ships that had glowed with impossible energy now drifted, scarred and dim, their crews exhausted but alive. For a long while, no one spoke across the channels. Humanity's fleet and the Council's armadas floated in the same vast space, enemies turned allies by necessity, bound together by the knowledge that they had nearly lost everything. The black ships still pulsed faintly with symbols, like a steady heartbeat reminding everyone that the danger was not truly gone, only delayed. On Earth, the first reports of survival brought relief that erupted into tears and celebration. Families embraced the news, grateful their loved ones had endured. Cities lit candles for those who had not returned, the glow spreading across the planet like a wave of remembrance. It was not triumph in the traditional sense, but survival, and that survival carried meaning. Humanity had proven that they could stand, not just against the Council's judgment or the galaxy's disbelief, but against something that had preyed on civilizations older and stronger. The message was clear. Earth was no longer a world to be dismissed. In the halls of the Council, silence reigned. The leaders who had once spoken with arrogance now struggled to find words. They had hidden the truth for centuries, believing secrecy would protect them, and yet it had nearly destroyed them all. The Council fractured, but in a different way than before. Some voices called for humility, for partnership with humanity, for shared strength. Others clung to fear, whispering that humanity's bond with the Black Fleet was unnatural, dangerous, perhaps even the infection itself in disguise. But those whispers were quieter now, drowned by the memory of the storm and the sight of human ships holding the line when others faltered. The Watchers, their stasis fully broken, walked among humanity for the first time. Though weakened, their presence carried a weight that silenced every room they entered. They explained what little they could. The enemy had no true form because it was not a single being. It was hunger, spreading from mind to mind until it consumed all. Civilizations before them had fallen because they turned against each other instead of holding together. The Watchers admitted they had made the same mistakes. They had underestimated the infection, and when their fleets shattered, they sealed what remained into the black ships, hoping one day someone would be strong enough to wield them differently. Humanity asked the question that weighed on every heart. Had they truly won? The Watchers' answer was simple and honest. They had endured, and that was victory enough. But the enemy's whisper at the end, that part was true. The infection lingered, not as a fleet or storm, but as doubt and fear within them. The real war was not just against an enemy in the stars, but against the fractures inside their own hearts. If they allowed themselves to splinter again, the shadow would find its way back. For the Council, this truth was more difficult to bear. They had always survived by control, by building unity through order and authority. Now they saw that control had blinded them. They had silenced humanity's warnings, dismissed their grief, and in doing so they had played directly into the enemy's design. Some resigned in shame, others vowed to rebuild with honesty, but all understood the same truth. They could no longer hold the galaxy together by fear. If survival was to mean anything, it had to be built on trust. Among the fleets, the crews slowly adjusted to what they had endured. The dreams that had plagued them faded, replaced by silence. Yet silence carried its own weight, a reminder of what might return. Humans and Council soldiers alike carried scars, not all of them visible. They had fought side by side, felt the infection claw at their thoughts, and resisted together. For many, that bond became unshakable. For others, the memory of how close they had come to destruction left only suspicion. The galaxy was alive, but it was changed. On Earth, leaders faced their own reckoning. Humanity had unleashed its ancient fleet, proved its strength, and forced the galaxy to recognize it. But power carried responsibility. Would Earth stand as a guardian, or would it become the very tyrant it once feared in the Council? The people debated fiercely, but one thing became clear: they could not turn inward again. To retreat into isolation after such a battle would only invite the infection's return. They would need to remain part of the galaxy, no matter how uneasy that role might be. The Black Fleet returned to its orbit above Earth, silent once more, though its presence was felt across every world. To some, the ships were a shield, hope made real. To others, they were a warning, a reminder that power without unity could be as dangerous as the shadow they had just faced. Engineers studied the vessels, but even with all their knowledge, the truth remained the same. The ships responded not to command, but to will. They could not be forced. They could only follow those strong enough to resist corruption. In time, the galaxy began to heal. Worlds that had rioted found stability again. Trade routes reopened. Refugees returned home. Yet the scars of what had happened would never fully fade. Humanity's name was now etched into every council chamber, not as a footnote, but as a power that had stood at the edge of annihilation and refused to break. The final question lingered like a shadow no one could ignore. The enemy had been defeated, yes, but it had left behind its whisper. You carry me with you always. No one could say what that meant. Was it simply fear, or had something deeper been planted in them all? The Watchers did not claim to know. Perhaps no one could. But one truth remained. If the infection thrived on division, then its defeat would come not from ancient fleets or hidden weapons, but from unity itself. The story of the human child, the tragedy that had sparked everything, became more than a wound. It became a symbol. Across Earth, statues were raised not of generals or leaders, but of the child whose loss had awakened an entire species to its place in the galaxy. On Council worlds, the memory of that moment became a lesson written into their history. The smallest life could change the course of everything. It was a reminder of the cost of arrogance, the price of silence, and the danger of underestimating those who had endured too much to ever bow again. And so the war ended not with triumph, but with reflection. Humanity had gained the respect it once lacked. The Council had been humbled, perhaps enough to begin anew. The Watchers, though broken, had passed their burden on to those strong enough to bear it. And the galaxy, though scarred, still turned, carrying with it the hope that unity could hold stronger than the whispers of the dark. The fleets withdrew, the storm faded, and peace, fragile, uncertain but real, settled across the stars. Humanity stood taller than before, knowing that the greatest battles ahead would not only be against enemies in the void, but against the doubts within themselves. The child's memory lingered. The whispers lingered. The heartbeat lingered. And yet, for the first time in a long age, the galaxy believed it could endure. The story of Earth and its ancient fleet would be told for generations, not as a tale of vengeance, not even of victory, but as proof that even when shadows rise, the light of unity can hold them back. The war was over, but the future was watching.